Have you ever lost yourself so completely that you were forced to forget your own identity? Eleanor Harper didn't know that after becoming a shadow at her own son's wedding, she would one day learn the most profound lesson of her life. Eleanor Harper stood at the edge of the grand barn, where her son Ryan's wedding was taking place. It was the kind of day she had dreamed of for him, a day she had envisioned for years. But as soon as she arrived, she realized she wasn't receiving any recognition or respect. There was a quiet ache in her heart, as her son, whom she had given everything for, had now erased her from his life. If you enjoy stories like this, make sure to subscribe to our channel. We'll be back every day with fresh new stories. Eleanor Harper stood at the edge of the grand barn, the sunlight casting long shadows over the sprawling lawn. It was the kind of day where everything seemed perfect, the kind of wedding day she'd imagined for Ryan since he was a boy. The guests were milling about, laughter and chatter drifting through the warm summer air. But for Eleanor, the celebration felt as distant as the stars. She paused for a moment before stepping inside, her heels tapping lightly on the gravel, as if she was unsure whether to take the next step. The barn doors were open, revealing the vibrant scene within. Long tables draped in white linens, glowing chandeliers overhead, and golden chairs that lined the aisle, each one placed with meticulous care. The air was thick with the scent of fresh flowers and polished wood. Every detail was crafted to perfection. And yet, none of it seemed to matter. As she stepped through the doorway, Eleanor scanned the room, her heart sinking with every glance. There was no sign of her name, no acknowledgement of her presence. No one had bothered to reserve a seat for her at the front, as she had imagined. Instead, there was a folding chair, tucked away near the kitchen, beside a stack of used trays and a cart with a broken wheel that squeaked every time someone pushed it. Her heart squeezed as she took in the sight. This was her place at her own son's wedding. She blinked hard, trying to shake off the sting that had already started to settle deep in her chest. But the truth was there, right in front of her. Ryan, her son, the little boy she had raised through sleepless nights, scraped knees, and all the quiet sacrifices of motherhood, was being celebrated by everyone but her. She caught sight of him, standing proudly by Madison Clark, his bride, surrounded by a crowd of laughing friends and family. They were the picture of happiness, of perfection, and there he was, shining in the spotlight. His smile was wide, his eyes bright, and he looked so much like the man he had become, a stranger to her now. No one had bothered to acknowledge her arrival. Not Ryan, not even Madison. The chaos of the wedding was already in full swing, and Eleanor was little more than a shadow. Standing off to the side, invisible, the catering manager, a young man no older than 25, glanced at her awkwardly as he passed, muttering something about staying out of the way. She forced a smile, her heart heavy with the weight of the unspoken truth. The bride didn't want her in the way of the picture-perfect wedding. "Just stay back here, ma'am," he said, almost apologetically, his eyes darting away. The bride. She wanted everything to be aesthetically pleasing, you know? Eleanor nodded, though every word he said seemed to pierce her. Aesthetic, as if she were something to be hidden, tucked away in the kitchen, far from the celebration. She wasn't even part of the theme, not part of the day she had spent years dreaming of, planning for, and sacrificing everything to make perfect. The music from the reception hall spilled through the swinging door, echoing in her ears. Laughter followed, bright and loud, like a distant chorus of voices that seemed to mock her silence. Her heart clenched as she watched them. Ryan and Madison, twirling in each other's arms on the dance floor, their laughter mingling with the band's upbeat rhythm. She could hear the clink of glasses being raised in toasts, the soft hum of joy that filled the air, while she sat in the shadows, unseen. The faint smell of marinara and garlic wafted through the kitchen doors, adding to the heaviness in her chest. Eleanor couldn't move. She couldn't breathe. All she wanted was to shout, "I'm the one who made this day possible." But she didn't. She stayed there, her back pressed against the cold kitchen wall, eyes fixed on the program she had been handed earlier at the church. The elegant cursive on cream cardstock mocked her. There at the top was the list of important people: Madison's parents, the officiant, the wedding party. and in the far corner of the page, buried beneath the long list of guests, was the small, silent space where Eleanor's name should have been. There was no mention of her anywhere. No recognition for the woman who had spent every penny she had to make this day a reality. Not even a glance from Ryan. No thank you. No acknowledgement of the countless hours she'd put in, the late-night shifts to pay for every little detail. Nothing. Instead, she sat in the back, tucked away like an unwanted guest. The music swelled again. Eleanor took a deep breath, the ache in her chest threatening to spill over. She pressed the napkin to her lips, pretending to dab away a non-existent stain. Her eyes burned, but she fought back the tears. She had to. This was Ryan's day. She couldn't ruin it for him. But deep inside, something was cracking. Slowly, quietly, like a hairline fracture in glass that no one could see. She stared at the peeling paint on the wall in front of her, the chipped white plate before her, untouched. The chicken, cold and unappetizing, sat in front of her, a symbol of everything she had become, an afterthought. She told herself to be patient, to keep quiet. But the truth lingered, heavy and undeniable. She wasn't part of this wedding. Not really. She wasn't part of Ryan's life anymore, not the way she once was. She was the one who stayed up when he was sick, who picked him up when he fell, who put him through school when there wasn't enough money. And now? Now she was nothing more than a ghost, serving the meal, cleaning up, and staying silent in the kitchen. For a moment, she wished she could just leave, slip away into the night where no one would see her. But she couldn't. She had given everything for this moment, this wedding, and she couldn't walk away. Not yet. Not until she had let herself be a part of it, even if only in the shadows. Eleanor stood at the edge of the kitchen, her back pressed against the cool tile wall. The warm glow from the reception hall seemed so distant, a world where everyone was laughing and celebrating, but it all felt out of reach. Through the swinging doors, she could hear the band playing a slow song, the soft hum of voices blending with the clinking of glasses. Ryan and Madison, the newlyweds, were in the center of it all, their faces lit with joy as they danced in each other's arms. For a moment, Eleanor closed her eyes, trying to shut out the noise, to block out the overwhelming ache that had taken root deep inside her. She didn't want to feel this way. She shouldn't feel this way. Ryan was happy. Madison was happy. This was their day, their perfect moment. She had made sure of that. Every detail, every extravagant flower arrangement, every inch of the venue had been paid for by her. But despite her best intentions, the emptiness inside her grew with every passing second. She tried to push away the frustration that bubbled up every time she heard someone laugh. Every time the band struck up a cheerful tune, they were celebrating without her. They were celebrating around her. The image of Ryan, the little boy she had raised twirling his bride, was almost too much to bear. He was radiant, his smile infectious, the kind of smile she hadn't seen directed at her in years. The boy she had stayed up with, tended to through every scraped knee and sleepless night, had become a man who no longer saw her. There, in the midst of the celebration, Ryan was everything she had hoped he would be. And she was invisible, just another face in the crowd. The woman who had paid for the wedding, the one who had made it all happen, was nothing more than a background character in the story of his life. The weight of her sacrifices hung heavily in the air around her. She had worked double shifts year after year, just to put food on the table and give Ryan a future. She had saved and sacrificed, pushing her own needs to the side, all for him. Yet here she was, watching from the shadows, relegated to a folding chair in the back of the room, while others took their place in the spotlight. Eleanor tried to steady her breath, but the tightness in her chest only grew. She had made sure everything was perfect, just as Ryan had wanted. The venue, the dress, the cake, everything had been tailored to Madison's vision, to Ryan's wishes. She had handed over her credit card without hesitation, believing that this day would be worth it. But what was the price of her sacrifice? What had she gotten in return? The clinking of silverware echoed from the reception hall, a sharp contrast to the silence in the kitchen. Every bite of food that was served, every glass of champagne raised in a toast, felt like a reminder of what she had lost. Ryan had moved on. He had his new life, his new family, and there was no place for her in it. She looked down at the plate in front of her, a half-eaten piece of chicken and a small salad. The food sat untouched, cold and unappetizing. It seemed like an insult. She had poured everything into making this day perfect, but now even the meal was a symbol of her exclusion. Her stomach twisted, not from hunger, but from the bitter taste of being forgotten. She had always put others first, Ryan, her family, even strangers in need. And yet, when it came time for her to be seen, to be appreciated for all she had done, she was nowhere to be found. There was no seat for her at the front of the room, no mention of her name in the program, no toast in her honor. She was nothing more than a shadow in the kitchen, a woman who had sacrificed everything for a son who couldn't even spare her a glance. The laughter from the reception hall rang through the walls, a sound that used to bring her comfort, but now it only deepened her sense of isolation. She longed to be part of it, to feel connected to the celebration, but she knew she would never be allowed to. The more she watched, the more she realized that she had been sidelined, discarded even, by the very people she had done so much for. Her hands clenched around the napkin on her lap, the crumpled paper a small representation of the fragile facade she had been holding on to. She wanted to scream, to shout that she mattered, that her sacrifices mattered, but no one would listen. No one would care. Eleanor fought back the tears that threatened to spill, but the weight of years of invisible sacrifice felt too much to bear. She had given everything for Ryan, and yet, here she was, alone. Her heart ached with a kind of quiet, simmering resentment. She had played her part, she had done everything right, but she had been erased from the story, and the more she tried to push away the pain, the more it crept in, settling deep within her. As she watched Ryan dance with Madison, she realized that this wasn't just about the wedding. It wasn't just about the flowers or the dress or the cake. It was about the years of being overlooked, the years of being the one who always gave, who always put others first. She had been the silent worker, the one who made everything happen without ever receiving any recognition. And now, as she watched her son, she couldn't ignore the truth any longer. She had spent her life invisible, even to those who should have seen her most. The music swelled again. A new song playing as the couple twirled under the soft golden lights. Eleanor's heart clenched. She wanted to be happy for them, to bask in the joy of their union, but all she felt was a gnawing emptiness. The years of sacrifice had built up to this moment of realization that no matter how much she had given, she would always be on the outside. The tension inside her grew, and for the first time, Eleanor felt the full weight of her years of silent sacrifice. The frustration, the resentment, the pain, it was all coming to a head. And though she couldn't voice it, though she couldn't scream, Eleanor knew that something inside her had shifted. The silent woman in the kitchen was no longer willing to be invisible. Something was changing, and no matter how hard she tried to hold it in, the cracks in her facade were beginning to show. Eleanor stood in the dimly lit corner of the kitchen, the hum of the reception still echoing through the walls. The music, the laughter, the clinking of glasses, they all felt distant now, like a world she could never touch. Her heart was heavy, her mind a swirling mix of anger, hurt, and a deep, aching emptiness. But amidst all the chaos, something inside her was shifting. It was quiet at first, a small, flickering thought, almost imperceptible. But as the evening wore on, that thought grew louder, more insistent, until it filled every corner of her mind. Enough. She had spent her entire life giving, sacrificing, pushing her own needs aside for others. But in that moment, as she stood there, watching Ryan spin Madison around on the dance floor, a deep, quiet realization washed over her. She had been invisible for far too long. She had been the one to make this day possible, to give them everything. And now it was time for her to take back control. The stillness in the kitchen felt different now, as if it were holding its breath, waiting for her to make a choice. Eleanor's hands trembled as she reached for her phone. For the first time in a long while, she felt a spark of something she hadn't known in years. Power. She dialed the florist first. Her voice was steady, calm, even as her heart raced. Hello, this is Eleanor Harper. I'm calling to cancel the flower delivery for tomorrow's brunch. The payment balance will be withheld. Thank you. She hung up without hesitation. No guilt, no regret. Just a quiet sense of resolve. Next, she called the band. The soft jazz still played in the background, but it felt like a distant memory now. Eleanor's grip on the phone tightened, but her voice never wavered. Hi, this is Eleanor Harper. Due to changes in the event schedule, we will not be needing the second performance. Please consider the matter closed. Another call. Another decision made. She felt the tension in her chest loosen slightly, as if the weight of years of unspoken sacrifice was finally beginning to lift. Her next call was to the bar manager. As she dialed the number, her mind flashed back to the late-night shifts she had worked, the times she had scrimped and saved just to make sure Ryan had everything he needed. The thought of her hard-earned money being used for a wedding that had cast her aside like an afterthought still stung. But as the phone rang, Eleanor's grip tightened on the receiver, her inner turmoil swirling in a way that almost felt empowering. Hi, this is Eleanor Harper. I'm calling to cancel the second bartender and the cocktail menu for the post-reception brunch. Please do not process the remaining balance. Thank you, she hung up. The calls were short, direct, and final. But it wasn't just about the money, the flowers, or the bar. It was about taking back what had been taken from her for so long. It was about claiming her space in a world that had tried to make her invisible. She wasn't a victim anymore. She was reclaiming her power. The weight in her chest had begun to shift, replaced by something unfamiliar. A quiet, calm strength. She no longer felt like the woman who had spent the entire day being forgotten, tucked away in the kitchen, serving others while her heart broke in silence. She wasn't the invisible mother, the one who had been overlooked for years. No, now she was the one making decisions. She was the one taking control. Eleanor sat down at the small table in the kitchen, her phone still warm in her hand. The walls around her felt less suffocating now. The music from the reception still drifted in from the other side, but it no longer felt like a reminder of what she had lost. It felt distant, like a world that no longer mattered to her. Her heart was still heavy with the betrayal, but the anger, the hurt, it had shifted. It was no longer consuming her. It had become something else. Fuel. She didn't need to be part of the celebration. She didn't need to sit at the front of the room. She didn't need to be acknowledged by anyone. All she needed was to stop pretending that she didn't matter. She did matter. She was the one who had made all of this happen. She was the one who had given everything, and she had the power to take it back. For the first time in years, Eleanor felt a flicker of something she hadn't known she was capable of: self-respect. She sat in the stillness of the kitchen for a moment, letting the feelings settle in. The phone calls were done, and with them, something inside her had shifted. She had done something for herself, something that no one could take away. She wasn't going to be the woman who quietly accepted the scraps anymore. Eleanor stood up, her legs steady beneath her. She had spent so many years tiptoeing around others, making sure they were happy, making sure they got what they needed. But not anymore. She was done being the afterthought, the one who was always invisible. And as she looked out through the kitchen window at the soft glow of the reception, Eleanor knew that the power she had felt in making those calls wasn't just about the wedding. It was about her life. She had the ability to change the narrative. She had the ability to reclaim what had always been hers. She didn't need to beg for anyone's approval anymore. She didn't need to beg for a seat at the table. She was going to sit at the head of her own. Eleanor sat on the edge of the stiff hotel bed, her dress still clinging to her skin, wrinkled and faded by the day's emotional weight. The air conditioning hummed quietly in the background, but it did nothing to cool the burn deep within her chest. The wedding, the phone calls, the hours spent in the shadows, it was all still swirling inside her head. The excitement from earlier had long since evaporated, leaving only the faint echo of a celebration she wasn't a part of. The pain, the humiliation, it all still lingered, sitting heavily in the pit of her stomach. Her body ached. Her feet, swollen from hours of standing in the back of the room, felt like lead. She had barely eaten. The cold chicken and limp salad on her plate earlier had lost all appeal. Her hands, still trembling from the phone calls she had made earlier, gripped her phone tightly as she stared at the glowing screen. The dim light from the bedside lamp flickered in her tired eyes. She leaned back against the headboard, closing her eyes, trying to settle the racing thoughts in her mind. You did the right thing, she told herself. You took control. You stood up for yourself. But even as she said it, a new wave of frustration washed over her. Why had it taken this long? She had been giving, and giving for so long that she hadn't even realized how much she had been drained. The phone calls were the first step, yes, but it felt like such a small victory in the face of everything she had lost. The muted hum of the wedding reception still echoed in the back of her mind. She hadn't wanted to ruin Ryan's day, but that didn't mean she didn't have a right to feel acknowledged. To feel like she mattered. I made this happen, Eleanor thought bitterly. I paid for it all, every flower, every chair, every expensive detail Madison insisted on. And yet, here I am, the woman who paid for everything, and no one even noticed. Her fingers moved absent-mindedly across the screen of her phone as she unlocked it. The wedding budget spreadsheet she had so meticulously kept over the past year came into view. The rows of transactions, payments, and charges scrolled endlessly before her. Eleanor had tracked every cent, every detail of the wedding planning. She had promised herself she would be thorough. And now, as she scrolled through the numbers, the raw sting of betrayal hit her again, sharper than before. There it was. 2 unauthorized charges, clearly marked. Charges made just days before the wedding. She frowned as she read the line items. Bar tab from the tasting event and dress rehearsal dinner upgrade. Her fingers hovered over the screen, disbelief creeping up her spine. Madison. The name on the charge was unmistakable. She used my card without asking. Eleanor's mind raced as she pieced together the timeline. The dinner at the same restaurant where Eleanor had been relegated to the back, near the kitchen. The hidden charges, the extravagant choices Madison had made, all without even a thought of consulting her. How dare she? Eleanor's pulse quickened as she replayed the events of the day. The way Madison had smiled at her, so sweetly, so politely, all the while knowing she had been using her for her money. The way she had effortlessly slid into Ryan's life as if Eleanor were no longer necessary. No longer a part of their perfect picture. But it's not just about the money, Eleanor realized, her thoughts suddenly clear. It's about the way she saw me, the way they all saw me. Her breath caught in her throat as the weight of it sank in. This wasn't about the wedding, the flowers, the cake. It wasn't even about the money. It was about her value. It was about the years she had spent sacrificing herself for everyone else, only to have them take her for granted. The flowers and the dress meant nothing compared to the silent toll it had taken on her. The realization hit harder than anything she had felt all night. She had been used, but as the sting of realization washed over her, another feeling began to rise. It wasn't anger, not anymore. It was something colder, more calculated. She wasn't going to let this consume her. She had spent so many years letting others define her, letting them decide how much she was worth. But this wasn't about their judgment anymore. It was about how she saw herself. Eleanor sat up straight, her spine stiffening as the truth began to settle in. She had been living a life where her worth was based on what she could give, on what she could do for others. For Ryan, for Madison, for anyone who needed her. But now she understood. She didn't need to give anything else. She was done being the backdrop to everyone else's story. The bitter taste of humiliation that had been lingering all evening slowly began to fade. It was replaced by something else, a quiet, powerful realization that she could take control of her own narrative. She didn't have to be a silent player in their world anymore. She could stand up. She could walk away from the people who had taken advantage of her, and she could move forward, reclaiming what had always been hers. Her fingers, now steady, slid across the screen of her phone once again. She clicked through the emails, the wedding details that no longer mattered, and for the first time that day, Eleanor didn't feel trapped. She didn't feel small. She felt clear. She was done being exploited, and she was done being invisible. Eleanor sat at the small desk in the corner of her hotel room. The soft flicker of the lamp casting a warm glow on the crumpled paper she had found in the bottom of her dresser drawer. It was the red folder, one she had thought she'd emptied long ago. But there it was, nestled between old insurance papers and faded photographs, the yellowed envelope still intact. Her hand shook slightly as she picked it up, her pulse quickening as she recognized the handwriting on the front, Michael Harper. Her ex-husband's script, familiar yet foreign, made her stomach twist. She hadn't opened the letter when she found it weeks after his death, the pain still too fresh, the anger too sharp. She had shoved it aside, unable to face it then. But now, as she sat alone in this sterile hotel room, her mind spinning with everything that had transpired, the wedding, the betrayals, the slow unraveling of her identity, she knew she had to read it. Eleanor ran her fingers along the edges of the paper, her breath shallow. What could Michael possibly have to say now? She thought bitterly. He'd left her with nothing but shattered promises and broken trust. Yet there was something about this letter, something about the timing, that felt different. With a deep breath, she tore open the envelope. The paper inside was thin, worn, and the writing slanted in that same familiar style. As she read the first few lines, the world around her seemed to quiet. Her heartbeat thudding in her ears. "Margaret, I know you never wanted to hear from me again, but I need to tell you something." The words hit her like a slap, and she gripped the letter harder, as if it might fly out of her hands. Her eyes scanned the next few lines, and the reality of the words began to sink in. "I've been carrying a secret, and I can't take it to the grave. You deserve the truth. Ryan isn't biologically yours." Eleanor's breath caught in her throat. The words didn't make sense at first. Ryan isn't mine. The world seemed to tilt, the room around her fading into a blur of confusion. She blinked hard, willing the words to make sense, but they didn't. What is this? A joke? Her mind spun as she forced herself to read the rest, her hands trembling as she unfolded the revelation. "I found out years ago that Emily was pregnant when we got together. She was 18, terrified, and asked me to give him up for adoption. I couldn't do it. I lied to you, Margaret. I told you Ryan was ours, that it was a mistake before we got married. You believed me. You raised him. You loved him like he was your flesh and blood. But the truth is, he wasn't even that. He was another woman's child. And you made him your world anyway." Eleanor's head swam, and she stopped reading, her vision blurry with unshed tears. "Ryan, my son, wasn't mine." The words felt like a weight, pressing down on her chest, threatening to crush her. She leaned back in the chair, her hands still clutching the letter, the truth sinking in with a cold, devastating finality. She had spent decades raising Ryan, loving him, giving him everything she had, her time, her energy, her heart. And now she was being told that he wasn't even hers. Not by blood, not by any measure other than the love she had given him. She felt the loss, the anger, the betrayal rise like a tide. But underneath it, something else stirred, a quiet, nagging feeling that she couldn't quite place. Why didn't I know? She asked herself. How did I never see it? The tears finally came then, though they weren't the explosive kind of tears she had expected. No, these were the kind that felt like a slow release, a quiet letting go of everything she had carried for so long. She had always known deep down that something was missing. There had always been a gap between her and Ryan, something unspoken. But now, with the truth laid bare in front of her, she couldn't help but feel free. She had loved him. She had raised him, and in her heart, he was hers. Nothing in this letter could change that. But it did change everything else. It changed the way she saw herself, the way she saw their relationship. She had been carrying this weight, this false narrative that she was somehow less because she wasn't his biological mother. But now she realized the truth. Ryan didn't define her. She defined herself. As the words sank in deeper, Eleanor's tears slowed, replaced by something sharper, clearer. She had been lied to, betrayed. But that wasn't the end of her story. It was the beginning of something new. She set the letter down on the table, her hands now steady. There was a sense of clarity in her that hadn't been there before. She wasn't just a mother to Ryan. She had been his rock, his foundation, his safe place. She had been the one who showed up, who fought for him, who loved him fiercely, and nothing could take that away. But it wasn't just about Ryan anymore. It was about her. The realization was sudden, almost overwhelming, but it was there. Eleanor was finally seeing herself for who she really was, a woman who had spent too long lost in the shadows, too long living for others. She had given everything she had, all for a son who would never truly know the depth of her sacrifice. And now, she was done. She stood up from the desk, feeling a sense of power rising inside her. No more shadows, she thought. No more being invisible. I matter. She walked to the window, staring out into the darkened night, the faint glow of streetlights shining through the blinds. Her heart was heavy with the weight of the truth, but also light with the knowledge that she was no longer a victim. She was in control. The discovery of the letter was the final piece she needed. It wasn't just a betrayal, it was her liberation. She had given everything to Ryan, but now it was time to give something to herself. The power to choose, the power to walk away when needed, the power to stop being invisible. She had been the mother who raised a child not her own. And now, she was becoming the woman who would reclaim everything she had lost. Eleanor stepped through the front door of her home, the familiar creak of the hinges almost comforting. The house, once filled with the sounds of Ryan's laughter, the clatter of his shoes on the stairs, and the hum of her daily routine, felt eerily quiet now. There was a stillness to it, a sense that it was waiting for her to acknowledge it, waiting for her to see what had been left unsaid for so long. She glanced around, taking in the soft beige walls, the worn armchair by the window where she used to sit with a book, the kitchen table where she had spent countless hours preparing meals for a family that seemed so much larger than just her and Ryan. The house didn't feel like home anymore. It felt like a memory. Her fingers brushed lightly against the frame of a photo on the mantel. It was one of Ryan's kindergarten graduation photos. His missing tooth, the marker stain on his shirt, his bright smile as he ran straight into her arms. She smiled softly at the image, but the smile felt foreign, a flicker of something long past. She had spent so many years living in the reflection of that moment, loving him with everything she had, building a life around him, around their life. But now, she realized that she had been so focused on what she had given, on the role of mother she had embraced so completely, that she had lost herself in the process. A hollow feeling settled in her chest, not one of loneliness, but of something deeper, quieter, emptiness, as though she had spent her entire life filling a space for everyone else, and in doing so, had forgotten to make room for herself. She had become so absorbed in the idea of being Ryan's mother, the woman who sacrificed everything for her child, that she had lost the woman who was just Eleanor. The woman who had dreams, who had her own life outside of the roles she had been cast into. Eleanor walked slowly through the hallway, her eyes grazing over the framed photographs that lined the walls. More memories of Ryan, his first day of school, his high school graduation, family vacations, holidays they had spent together. All these moments, these milestones, these beautiful chapters of a life she had built so meticulously had been hers. They were her sacrifices, her love, her dedication. And yet with every step, Eleanor felt the weight of them. She had given herself so fully to Ryan that she had nothing left for herself. She reached the staircase where the photographs continued, each one more vivid, more precious than the last. But as her fingers grazed the frames, Eleanor's heart began to quiet. The realization that had been growing inside her, that had finally come to the surface, seemed to hum quietly in the background of her mind. These aren't mine anymore. These memories, this life, isn't mine to cling to. With a deep breath, Eleanor reached for the first frame on the wall, the kindergarten photo of Ryan, so full of innocence and joy. She had held onto it for years, never even considering what it would be like to let go. But now, with a soft sigh, she placed it gently on the table and picked up another, and another. Each one seemed heavier than the last, each photo a reminder of a time when she had put everything into a role that was no longer hers. She wasn't just a mother anymore. She wasn't just the woman who had poured her heart into raising a child who never truly saw her. As the frames stacked up on the table, Eleanor felt an odd sense of lightness, like she was finally breathing again for the first time in years. The house, once a museum of her sacrifices, now felt more like a space where she could begin again. She moved to the bookshelf and pulled out the family albums, worn, faded books filled with pictures of Ryan at every stage of his life. She flipped through the pages, pausing on each one, but it was different now. She wasn't looking at them through the lens of motherhood. She was looking at them with the eyes of Eleanor, just Eleanor. The weight in her chest had softened. The anger, the hurt, the betrayal, they were still there, but now they felt like old wounds that had begun to heal. She wasn't going to be angry anymore. She wasn't going to be the woman who was angry at the world for never recognizing her sacrifice. She had spent so much time being everything for everyone else, but now she was going to be something for herself. Eleanor moved to the mantel and carefully lifted each photograph, one by one, and placed them in a box. She didn't throw them away. She didn't need to erase her past, but she needed to stop living in it. It was time to let go. The woman who had raised Ryan was not the woman who stood here today. She had spent years being defined by that role, and it was time to redefine herself. The last photo went into the box, and Eleanor stood back, surveying the room. The emptiness felt different now, not lonely but spacious. There was room for something new. A sense of acceptance settled in her heart, quiet but powerful. She wasn't running away from the past, but she was no longer bound by it. She walked into the kitchen and opened the cabinet, pulling out the fine china she had never used, the set she had kept for special occasions, for the family dinners that never came. She set the table for one, a simple place setting, just for her. It felt odd at first, but as she set the last fork down, a small smile tugged at her lips. This was hers. This was her space, her moment. For the first time in years, she wasn't preparing for anyone else. She was preparing for herself. As she sat at the table, a plate of food she had cooked just for her, Eleanor closed her eyes and breathed in deeply. She didn't need validation from anyone. She didn't need anyone's approval. She had spent too many years living in the shadow of others, making them the center of her universe, but no more. Tonight, she was choosing herself. Eleanor stood in the kitchen, the soft hum of the overhead light mixing with the faint sound of birds outside the window. It was quiet now, just her and the rhythm of the knife slicing through the fresh vegetables. The act of preparing food, something so simple, so everyday, had taken on new meaning. Each chop of the knife, each stir of the pot felt like a declaration. This is mine. This moment is for me. For years, cooking had been a chore, a task done to fill bellies, to please others, to make sure Ryan had what he needed. But now, as she prepared her own meal, Eleanor could feel something shifting inside her. It wasn't just about the food. It was about taking control of her life in the smallest, most intimate ways. She wasn't cooking for anyone else, not for Ryan, not for a husband who had left, and certainly not for a life that demanded her to be invisible. No, today she was cooking for Eleanor. She smiled to herself as she set the table, the delicate sound of the silverware clinking against the porcelain plate echoing in the otherwise silent room. It was nothing elaborate, just a simple pasta dish with garlic, olive oil, and fresh basil. But as she set the table for one, Eleanor couldn't help but feel a quiet satisfaction. The placemat, the glass of wine, the soft candlelight flickering on the table, it all felt so right. She wasn't pretending. She wasn't waiting for someone to sit across from her. She was enjoying her own company, and that felt like a triumph. After everything, after the years of being everything for everyone else, this was her reward. It was small, but it was hers, and that was enough. The sun was beginning to set, casting a golden glow through the windows, and Eleanor moved toward the garden, drawn to the small patch of earth she had tended to over the years. It wasn't much, just a few rows of flowers and herbs, a couple of raised beds. But to her, it was a sanctuary. It had always been her place of peace, a small reminder of her own ability to create something beautiful. She knelt down, her fingers brushing the soil as she ran her hands over the lavender she had planted last spring. The scent was calming, a balm to the weariness she had carried for so long. She took her time, letting the quiet of the evening wrap around her. There was something meditative about the way the earth responded to her touch, the way the flowers seemed to bloom just a little bit brighter with each passing day. She wasn't doing it for anyone else anymore. She wasn't waiting for approval or recognition. She was doing it for herself. As she stood and surveyed the garden, the breeze stirring the leaves, Eleanor felt a lightness in her chest. It wasn't about the big, dramatic gestures. It wasn't about making grand changes overnight. It was about finding joy in the small, everyday things. The way the garden bloomed because of her care. The way the meal she cooked filled her with warmth. Not because it was fancy or extravagant, but because it was made with intention. Every step, every moment was a reclaiming of herself. Later, as she sat at the table and ate her meal, Eleanor felt a quiet contentment. There was no rushing, no obligation to move on to the next thing, no pressure to fulfill a role she wasn't ready to play anymore. She could simply be, and that in itself was a victory. She was learning how to enjoy her own company, how to relish in the simple act of living for herself. As she sipped her wine, the evening light fading into twilight, Eleanor felt a sense of freedom she hadn't known in years. This was her life now, small moments of peace, quiet joy, and the freedom to exist for herself. No longer weighed down by the expectations of others, no longer trapped by the need to be someone else's idea of what she should be. She was Eleanor Harper, just Eleanor, and that was more than enough. Outside, the stars began to twinkle, and Eleanor felt a flicker of hope rise within her. It wasn't about having it all figured out, about fixing everything at once. It was about letting go of what had been, allowing herself to simply be, and finding joy in the things that were truly hers. The garden, the kitchen, the table for one, these were her small victories, and they were hers to cherish. She smiled, content in the quiet stillness of the night, knowing that tomorrow would come, and with it, more moments of reclaiming her life, one small victory at a time. Eleanor stood in her kitchen, the familiar hum of her oven and the soft clink of dishes setting the rhythm of her evening. The table was set, a simple, elegant arrangement of mismatched plates, fresh linens, and candles flickering softly in the center. The sun had long set, leaving the room bathed in the golden light of a nearby lamp. Tonight was different. Tonight, Eleanor wasn't preparing a meal for an audience that never truly saw her. Tonight she was cooking for herself, yes, but she was also cooking for the people who had chosen her, those who understood her, who saw her for who she truly was. The guests had started to arrive. Claire, her old friend from the ER, always there with a laugh and a comforting presence. Mr. Henderson, the neighbor who had quietly taken care of her yard on countless mornings when the snow was too heavy. Dina from the bookstore, who always took the time to ask how Eleanor's week was going. Nurse Janet, who had stayed late on her own birthday just to cover a shift for Eleanor. These were the people who saw her, not just as a mother, not just as a provider, but as Eleanor Harper, a woman with her own life, her own stories, and her own worth. The contrast was sharp, almost painfully so. Eleanor thought back to the wedding, the cold, distant reception where she had been hidden away, an afterthought, her presence barely acknowledged. She had sat alone, relegated to the kitchen, the woman who had paid for it all, but received nothing in return but invisible duty. Tonight, everything was different. The energy in the room was warm and filled with laughter that didn't sting. The conversations were genuine, the connections real. As each person entered, Eleanor felt a quiet pride in her own ability to build this new life. A life where she wasn't just someone's background character, but was seen, truly seen. She moved to the kitchen counter to finish arranging the food, her heart light as she glanced out the window into the garden where she had spent so much time, her hands working to cultivate more than just plants, but a sense of peace in herself. The aroma of garlic, roasted vegetables, and fresh herbs filled the space, and as she set the last dish on the table, the first guests had already settled in, glasses of wine in hand, making themselves at home in the way only people who truly cared could. Claire was the first to speak, her voice warm and bright. "You look amazing, Maggie," she said, her words simple but filled with sincerity. "I can't remember the last time we've had a meal like this." Eleanor smiled, her heart swelling just a little. "It's been a while," she replied, as she set down the last plate of pasta and took a seat at the table. "I'm glad you're here." The evening unfolded with easy conversation. Laughter bubbled up as Mr. Henderson shared a story about getting locked out of his house in his underwear after a mix-up with his keys. Everyone chuckled, and Eleanor found herself laughing too. Really laughing. Without a hint of guilt, without the need to hide behind a mask of silence. As the meal was served, each guest contributed to the conversation, each one offering pieces of themselves, without any pretension, without any effort to impress. There was no need for performance, no need for Eleanor to act like someone she wasn't. Here, she didn't have to hide or shrink. She could just be herself. The food wasn't perfect, but it didn't need to be. The laughter and the warmth in the room were more than enough. Eleanor's thoughts drifted, just for a moment, to the wedding, the opulence, the false sense of grandeur that had made her feel so insignificant. The silence that had followed her every movement, the way Ryan had danced with Madison, the way her name had never been spoken. Here, though, in this room, the atmosphere was light, unburdened by expectation or pretense. She wasn't invisible. She wasn't a problem that had been solved by a folding chair in the back of the room. She was present, and that mattered more than anything. As the evening wore on, the group moved to the living room, glasses of wine in hand, their voices spilling over one another in happy harmony. Dina laughed, her eyes sparkling as she recounted the chaos of a recent book club meeting. Claire joined in, teasing her about one of the novels they had read. Nurse Janet, always the quiet one, chimed in with a funny anecdote from the hospital, and Mr. Henderson leaned in with a wink, adding his own 2 cents about their latest neighborhood gossip. Eleanor listened, her heart swelling with affection for these people who had become her chosen family. They weren't related by blood, but that didn't matter. In this room, they were all family. She was no longer just a mother or a provider. She was a woman with her own place, her own voice, her own worth. The concept of family had always been tied to obligation, but tonight it felt different. It felt like freedom. It was Claire who raised her glass first. To Eleanor, she said, her voice clear and strong, for being the kind of woman who reminds us all that it's never too late to take your seat at the head of your own table. Everyone raised their glasses, echoing Claire's sentiment. To Eleanor, they repeated, their voices full of affection and respect. Eleanor felt a warmth flood through her, and for the first time in years, she didn't feel like an outsider in her own life. She felt seen. She felt respected. These people, these friends, had chosen her, not because of what she could give or do for them, but because they saw the woman she truly was. To us, Eleanor said, lifting her glass. To being seen, to choosing ourselves, and to knowing when to stop giving to people who only know how to take. The glasses clinked together, the sound a simple affirmation of everything she had learned. She wasn't invisible anymore. She wasn't going to be anyone's afterthought. She was at the head of her own table, surrounded by people who saw her, who loved her, and who appreciated her for exactly who she was. And for the first time in a long time, Eleanor felt at peace. She was no longer living for anyone else. She was living for herself. As the evening continued to unfold, the warm laughter, clinking glasses, and easy conversation flowed around the table. Eleanor, sitting in her place at the head of the table, felt a deep sense of peace settle over her. The room was filled with voices that knew her, truly knew her, not just as a mother, not just as someone's provider, but as a woman. And for the first time in a long time, she realized how much she had missed this, being seen for who she truly was. After a few more rounds of storytelling and shared laughter, the table quieted down and all eyes turned to Jenna Matthews. Jenna, the vibrant woman who had been a part of Eleanor's life for as long as she could remember, stood slowly, her glass in hand. She had always been a woman of few words, but when she spoke, people listened. Eleanor felt a knot of anticipation form in her chest as Jenna cleared her throat, her gaze soft but resolute. Jenna took a deep breath, looking around the table before her eyes finally rested on Eleanor. There was no fanfare, no flourish, just a simple, quiet acknowledgement that spoke volumes. The room seemed to hush, the noise of the world outside fading into a distant hum, as though the moment had its own gravity, pulling everything into focus. To Eleanor, Jenna began, her voice steady but full of warmth. For so many years, you've been the one who held everything together. For Ryan, for everyone, you've given and given, never asking for anything in return. You've carried so much weight, and yet you never asked anyone to see how heavy it was. But tonight, we're here to say, we see you. Eleanor's breath caught in her throat, her heart swelling with something she hadn't expected. They see me. They really see me. Jenna's words continued, each one landing with quiet power. You've been the foundation for so many, and now, for the first time, we get to be the foundation for you. You've spent years building everyone else up, your family, your friends, but tonight, Eleanor, we celebrate you. Not the mother, not the provider, but the incredible woman who deserves everything she's given to others. The woman who finally chose herself. A hush fell over the table as Jenna's words settled into the air, each person in the room feeling the weight of them. And Eleanor, for the first time, felt it too, felt the truth of it in her bones. She wasn't just the woman who had sacrificed everything for her family. She wasn't just the quiet background figure. She was worthy of love, worthy of respect, worthy of a life that was her own. Jenna raised her glass higher, the edges of her smile catching the soft glow of the candlelight. To Eleanor, she said, her voice rich with affection, for finally giving herself the gift she's always given to others, for choosing herself, for knowing that it's never too late to take your seat at the head of your own table. The room erupted in a chorus of agreement, glasses clinking, and the sound of cheers filling the air. Eleanor's eyes stung with unshed tears, but these weren't the tears of anger or betrayal she had shed in the past. These were the tears of release, of relief, of finally realizing that all her sacrifices, all the pain, had led her to this moment, the moment where she could finally breathe, finally live for herself. As the clinking of glasses died down, Eleanor's heart swelled, a quiet, unshakable joy filling her chest. She looked around the table, meeting the eyes of the people who had chosen to be there for her. She wasn't invisible anymore. She wasn't the backdrop. She was here, a part of this, and she mattered. Her worth was no longer defined by the roles she had played for others. It was defined by who she was, by the strength it took to stand up for herself, to claim the life she deserved. The warmth of the evening wrapped around her like a blanket, a soft, comforting embrace that told her everything was going to be okay. The love and respect she had longed for weren't distant dreams anymore. They were real, and they were here. Eleanor raised her glass, her hand steady, her heart full. To chosen family, she said, her voice thick with emotion. To the ones who see us, who love us, and who remind us every day that we are worthy. This is for us. As she took a sip from her glass, Eleanor couldn't help but smile. The weight that had hung over her for so long, the weight of not being enough, the weight of living for others, had finally lifted. She had come into her own, not by changing who she was, but by letting go of the things that had been holding her back. She had chosen herself, and in doing so, she had found everything she needed. She was Eleanor Harper, and for the first time in years, she was proud of who she had become. The room filled with laughter again, but this time, it was different. It was a celebration, not just of the food, the wine, or the company, but of the woman Eleanor had become. She wasn't invisible. She wasn't waiting for someone to acknowledge her. She had already acknowledged herself, and that, in itself, was the greatest gift. Eleanor stood by the window, watching the gentle sway of the trees outside. The house was quiet, but there was an unmistakable tension in the air, thick and palpable. Her thoughts drifted to the events of the past few weeks. The dinner party, the quiet affirmation from her friends, the moments of peace she had begun to carve out for herself. It had felt like a rebirth, a rediscovery of who she was without the weight of others' expectations. But now, standing in the middle of her peaceful home, she knew that something still remained unresolved. The doorbell rang, a sudden sharp sound that cut through the stillness. Eleanor's pulse quickened. She knew who it was before she even looked out the window. Ryan, her son, the one who had been a part of her life for so many years, but who, in the last few days, had become a reminder of everything she had sacrificed and everything she had been denied. She moved slowly toward the door, her heart steady, but her mind racing. She opened it to find Ryan standing there, looking as if he hadn't slept in days. His face was drawn, tired, but there was something else in his eyes, a mixture of regret and confusion, as if he was still trying to make sense of everything that had happened. For a moment, they just stood there facing each other. Neither spoke. Finally, Ryan broke the silence. "Mom," he said, his voice tight, almost tentative. "I don't understand what's going on. I've been trying to reach you for days. What happened? Why did you cancel everything? Why did you leave the wedding like that?" Eleanor's gaze was steady, unwavering. She didn't feel the need to explain herself anymore. The version of her that would have apologized, that would have justified her actions, was no longer here. She had given that woman away, along with the pieces of herself she had lost along the way. Now she was Eleanor Harper, and she was done hiding. "You know exactly why I left, Ryan," she said, her voice calm but firm. "You and Madison have been taking from me for years. You've taken my time, my love, my money, and every ounce of what I had to give. And I let you, but I'm not going to let you do it anymore." Ryan flinched, as if her words had hit him harder than he expected. He opened his mouth to speak, but Eleanor held up her hand, stopping him. "I've spent my entire life making sure you had everything you needed," she continued, her voice unwavering. "I've sacrificed everything for you. For your happiness, for your future. But in doing that, I lost myself. I became nothing more than a backdrop in your life. I wasn't Eleanor anymore. I was just Mom. The woman who gave and who was never seen. But I'm not doing that anymore." Ryan stared at her, his eyes clouded with something between guilt and frustration. "You're not making sense. I never asked you to do all of that," he said, his voice raw, pleading. "No, you didn't," Eleanor agreed. "But I did it because I thought it was my role. I thought that was what I was supposed to do. I thought I had to give everything I had to you. Because that's what mothers do, right? They give up their lives for their children." She paused, her words sinking into the space between them. "But what about me, Ryan? What about what I needed?" The silence that followed was heavy, like a weight neither of them wanted to lift. Ryan's eyes flickered down to the floor, then back to his mother. He opened his mouth, but the words seemed to fail him. The truth hung in the air like a dense fog, and for the first time, Eleanor realized that he wasn't the only one who had been living in a fantasy. She had too. She had lived in the fantasy of self-sacrifice, believing it would earn her love, recognition, and fulfillment. But it hadn't. And now, as much as it hurt, she knew she had to let go of that fantasy, for both of their sakes. "I've done enough for everyone else, Ryan," she said quietly, her voice steady and final. "Now it's my turn to live for myself. I don't need your approval. I don't need your love to define me. I am enough as I am, and I'm not going to sacrifice myself for you or anyone else anymore." Ryan stood there, his face a mixture of confusion and sadness. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then, with a heavy sigh, Ryan stepped forward, closing the gap between them. But as he reached for her, Eleanor stepped back, holding up a hand. "No, Ryan," she said, her voice soft but resolute. "This isn't about fixing things. It's about me finally choosing myself. You need to understand that." Ryan's expression faltered, but there was no anger in his eyes, only the rawness of realization. "I didn't know," he said quietly, his voice breaking. "I didn't know how much you were hurting." Eleanor's heart clenched at the sight of his vulnerability. For a moment she felt the tug of that old familiar instinct to comfort him, to make everything okay. But she held her ground, her resolve firm. "I know you didn't," she said gently. "But that's why I'm doing this. For both of us. You have to live your life, and I have to live mine. We can't keep living for each other anymore. Not like this." Ryan nodded slowly, his eyes filled with something Eleanor couldn't quite place. Maybe it was regret. Maybe it was understanding. But either way, Eleanor knew that the confrontation wasn't about winning or losing. It was about letting go. With one last, lingering look, Ryan turned and walked out of the door, leaving Eleanor standing there, alone, but not lonely. She watched him leave, the weight of the years she had spent trying to fix things slowly lifting off her shoulders. The door clicked shut behind him, and Eleanor stood there for a moment longer, breathing in the quiet of her home. The world outside felt distant now, not because she was running away from it, but because she had found her own place in it. She walked slowly to the dining room, where the table from her dinner party still stood. The remnants of her meal from earlier that evening now cleared away. But the table itself remained, a symbol of something she had created for herself, a symbol of the life she was now choosing to live. She walked to the head of the table and sat down, her hand resting on the edge. For the first time in years, Eleanor felt truly at peace. This was her table, this was her life, and it was hers to live, exactly as she was. She didn't need anyone else to complete her. She was complete on her own, and for the first time, she felt the full weight of that truth, settling deep into her bones. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, share, and comment below. Let us know your thoughts, and make sure to subscribe for more amazing stories every day.